30 years of dedication, built on a core algorithm, can't be erased with a memo. They tried to call me legacy, but they forgot one crucial thing. The coffee tasted like burnt ambition, and honestly, that was the perfect metaphor for how I felt that morning. The coffee in the mug was bitter, the kind of black sludge that tastes like burnt ambition. And that was fitting because that's exactly what I felt swirling in my stomach right now. It was a sour, churning knot that had been tightening for weeks, growing steadily heavier until it felt like it was pressing right against my ribs, demanding release. I leaned back in the worn leather chair, the one that creaked like an old man with bad knees every time you shifted your weight, and stared out the panoramic window at the city. Tiny cars crawled along the concrete veins below, oblivious to the seismic event about to unfold in my cubicle. For 30 years, this company, Stellar Dynamics, had been my world. It wasn't just a place where I clocked in and punched out. It was the scaffolding of my life. It was the steady paycheck that paid for the mortgage on a house that felt more like a fortress than a home. It was the pension plan that promised dignity in retirement, the one that felt solid and unshakable. I wasn't just a senior engineer. I was a keeper of secrets, a living repository of institutional knowledge. I knew how the early prototypes breathed. I understood the subtle nuances of the manufacturing tolerances that the young Turks, the shiny-suited, buzzwords-laying newcomers, simply couldn't fathom. And the IP, the intellectual property, that was my crown jewel, the thing that made me indispensable, the thing that made me, frankly, untouchable. The core algorithm for the Stellar Drive system, the one that made our electric vehicles whisper down the highway instead of roaring their way through the smog, that was largely, fundamentally, mine. I'd been the one sketching it out on grease-stained napkins during late-night brainstorming sessions when the office was empty, fueled by lukewarm pizza and sheer, stubborn dedication. I'd refined it, debugged it, and watched it evolve from a theoretical mess into the industry standard. So, when the memo landed, crisp and unforgivingly white on my desk, I felt a genuine, physical jolt. My hand, resting near the keyboard, twitched. The subject line read, organizational restructuring. The body, in its overly cheerful, corporate font, mentioned synergy, optimization, and the need to streamline legacy roles. Legacy, that was my designation. 30 years of sweat, blood, and proprietary code reduced to a quaint, outdated artifact. I read it 3 times. Once, my eyes glazed over, trying to find the hidden punchline, the polite caveat. Twice, I scanned it with a rising sense of dread, confirming the inevitable. And the third time, I focused on the final paragraph, the one that sealed the coffin lid. Mr. Harrison's role will be transitioning to an advisory capacity, effective immediately, pending a final severance package review. Advisory. Translation. You're toast, but we'll give you a nice little plaque and a pat on the head. The name attached to this glorious corporate execution was Julian Vance. Vance, the new CEO. He had arrived 6 months ago, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and an earned confidence. He swept through the halls like a highly polished scale, his handshake firm, his pronouncements grand. He spoke in bullet points, obsessed with disruption and leveraging assets. He looked at me, Harrison, with a mixture of polite condescension and barely concealed impatience, like I was an antique piece of furniture that needed to be moved out of the way to allow the modern, sleek aesthetic to take hold. My initial reaction was a slow burn of incredulous anger. 30 years. Vance hadn't even given me a decent thank you speech for the last 5 years, just a cursory nod during department meetings. He saw me not as the architect of a key product line, but as a reliable cog, one that needed replacing with a newer, shinier model, a model he, naturally, probably designed himself in a 30-minute sprint. I spent the rest of the morning in a haze of simmering resentment, meticulously gathering my documentation, not just the project files, mind you, the original concept sketches, the signed patents, the emails where I documented the critical breakthroughs that Vance's own team had merely implemented. I was building a case, brick by painstaking brick, a fortress of evidence against his abstract corporate narrative. Around noon, the cavalry arrived. Vance himself, flanked by his chief strategy officer, a woman named Annie who had the terrifying ability to maintain a perfectly neutral expression while simultaneously radiating judgment. They stood in the doorway of my office, hands clasped loosely in front of them, radiating the patience of men who have waited for something important to happen, something that, in this case, was the official termination of my comfort. Robert, Vance said, his voice smooth, pitched just perfectly to sound authoritative without ever needing to be loud. Anya and I wanted to personally congratulate you on your tenure. Truly remarkable contributions to the stellar drive platform. The praise felt like spit on a freshly polished floor. It was hollow and sincere, and aimed solely at softening the blow. Thank you, Julian. I managed, my voice coming out a little tighter than I intended. It's been a privilege, indeed, which is why, Anya smoothly interjected, stepping forward. We believe the next logical step is to facilitate a smoother transition of your responsibilities. As detailed in the memo, the advisory role is a short-term engagement, allowing you to mentor the incoming lead engineer while we integrate your core knowledge. Integrate, I echoed, letting the word hang in the air, thick and mocking, meaning you're taking it over, haven't you? Meaning you're taking the reins to put your own stamp on it, without the 30 years of foundational work to justify the cost. Vance smiled, a practiced, charming curve of the lips that never quite reached his eyes. Robert, please. Such antiquated thinking. We are optimizing. We are streamlining. You built the engine. Now we're optimizing the aerodynamics. It's evolution, not replacement. The word optimization hit me like a slap. Evolution. He treated the entire history of this company like a badly organized spreadsheet that needed a final, aggressive scrub. This was the point where the quiet rage started to boil over into something more visceral, something that felt hot and electric in my chest. My knuckles, gripping the edge of my desk, turned white. Optimization, I repeated, leaning forward, finally meeting his gaze directly. Anya, bless her perfectly composed soul, held her breath. Tell me, Julian, when you talk about optimization, were you talking about the initial algorithm, the one that required 3 years of iterative refinement, the one that accounted for thermal variance at sub-zero temperatures? Or are you talking about the slightly tweaked version that your team bolted onto the prototype last fiscal quarter? Vance blinked once, a minuscule hesitation. That was his weakness. He was used to people nodding along. It's the platform, Robert. It's the whole integrated system. No, I shook my head. The movement sharp and decisive. The platform is a structure. The algorithm, the brain. Julian, the thing that actually makes the car move intelligently. That's mine. You and your team are brilliant implementers. You are magnificent decorators. But you haven't invented the foundation. My voice was rising now, gaining a rough edge, stripping away the corporate politeness layer by layer until only the raw, defensive core of Harrison remained. When you look at that IP, the core intellectual property that justifies the billions in valuation, you don't see a historical contribution. You see a line item on a balance sheet that needs to be attributed to your department's success story. You want the credit without the labor, the fanfare without the grit. Anya finally stirred, a subtle shift in her posture, signaling her readiness to deploy the corporate shield. Robert, with all due respect, this is a very emotional framing. We are offering you a generous package, a significant consultancy role. The package is irrelevant if you don't acknowledge the debt. I cut her off, turning my focus back to Vance, hitting him with a look that felt years in the making. You want me to become a glorified technical advisor, someone who checks your boxes and confirms that the things your team didn't quite invent actually work. You want me to lend my name, my 30 years, to give your shiny, new optimization the veneer of authenticity. Vance, for the first time, looked genuinely thrown. The practiced composure flickered, revealing a flash of annoyance, perhaps even fear. He hadn't expected this level of direct confrontation. He was used to compliance, not confession. So what is your position, Robert? He asked, his voice dropping slightly, losing some of its manufactured buoyancy. It became sharper, more predatory. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the air tasting metallic in my lungs. This was it, the moment of truth. The rage settled, hardening into a cold, clear resolve. My position, Julian, is that an advisory role is a polite way of saying disposable. I built this thing. I breathed life into the code. I am not a footnote. I am the main chapter. I paused, letting the weight of that statement settle over the pristine expanse of his office. The severance package you are offering me is less than a retainer for the value of the IP I am bringing to your desk tomorrow morning. I pushed away from the desk, standing up to meet him eye to eye. The difference in height was minimal, but the shift in gravity felt enormous. You want me to advise? Fine, but you need to understand what that advice costs. It costs you acknowledging that Julian Vance didn't invent the stellar drive. It costs you admitting that the real engine, the original design, was crafted by Robert Harrison. It costs you giving me the title I deserve, and a salary that reflects the fact that I am, quite literally, the gold standard you are trying to replicate. Vance stared at me, his jaw tightening. The silence stretched, taut and unbearable, punctuated only by the distant, muffled sound of the city traffic. Annie looked like she might spontaneously combust from suppressed stress. He finally broke the silence, and the words that came out were not slick or corporate. They were clipped, serious, and held the unmistakable ring of a man who has just been told his meticulously curated reality is flawed. "We can discuss that," he said, nodding slowly. "A substantial increase. And we can make the advisory role more strategic." Strategic, I repeated, a faint, grim smile touching my lips. "Yes, meaning I get to point out precisely where your brilliant optimization is about to fail under real-world stress." I looked past him, out the window, back at the crawling metal forms below. The knot in my stomach hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. It was no longer a knot of bitter fury. It was a dense, powerful sphere of earned satisfaction. I had been challenged, cornered, and then I had struck back, not with an explosion, but with the undeniable, unarguable weight of fact. "Send the revised proposal to my private email," I instructed, turning back to Vance. "And Julian, don't mistake my cooperation for surrender. I am not a legacy role waiting to be archived. I am the source material. And you," I finished, letting the last word hang there, heavy and true, "or just the latest, very expensive reprint."